Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Welcome to everyone. It's a really great turnout. Thank you for joining us for our Ocean Nexus webinar on projecting the blue economy. This event is presented by the Nippon Foundation and Ocean Nexus. For those of you who don't know, the Nippon Foundation is an international philanthropic organization with a mission to support social innovation and humanitarian efforts and striving to realize a society in which all people support one another. And within that Ocean Nexus is a global network of scholars who conduct ocean-focused research with empathy, applying an anti-inequity approach that draws on anti-racist, anti-colonial, and intersectional analyses. And our mission is to establish social equity as a central objective of ocean governance. This ocean webinar series invites everyone interested in these issues of ocean equity to join us at the Ocean Equity Learning Forum, which you can find at oceannexus.org. My name is Andrés Cisneros-Montemayor. I'm the Deputy Director of Ocean Nexus, and I'm an assistant professor at the School of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver, Canada. Today's webinar features how to project the future of the blue economy. And it's been almost a decade since that term blue economy was introduced as an aspirational goal of island nations to center their own worldviews in equitable economic development. And 3 years ago, we started doing some initial global work and published a paper that integrated multiple types of data on resource availability and social and political conditions to show the current need to address very important gaps in ocean governance if you want to achieve that blue economy that is equitable as originally proposed. However, in that paper and in that work, we hadn't yet included a key concern, which is change, and specifically climate change. So the webinar today presents new research on those projections of likely future blue economy, which will be presented by one of our Ocean Nexus fellows, who I'll introduce in a second. We'll then have a joint Q&A session and a discussion led by the director of Ocean Nexus, Dr. Yoshitaka Ota. He's a professor of marine affairs and a chair of ocean equity and governance at the University of Rhode Island. He holds a PhD in anthropology from the University College London and an executive master of public administration from the Evans Policy School at the University of Washington. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Pedro González-Espinosa. He is a marine biologist from the Universidad Autónoma de Baja California Sur, Mexico. So that's Baja California Sur State University, essentially. And he has an MSc in Natural Resource Management as well from CIBNOR in La Paz. He received his PhD in geography from the University of British Columbia and is now a fellow with Ocean Nexus. And he's also based at the School of Resource and Environmental Management at Simon Fraser University. Now, Pedro specializes in analyzing the effects of climate change on marine ecosystems, but more importantly on society through a quantitative models and techniques. And his most recent papers include one on integrating equity-focused planning into coral bleaching management. And as you'll see today, he's extending this into some very exciting research to see what the future of the blue economy in its entirety looks like, so that we can be more honest about future development and better support the local communities that rely on oceans the most. So during this presentation, please write your questions in the Q&A tab, which you can find at the bottom of your screens there, and we'll read them out after the presentation altogether. So now please welcome Dr. Pedro González-Espinosa. And Pedro, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Andrés. I'm very happy to be here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing now my screen. Otherwise, please let me know. Thank you so much, and thank you for the introduction, Andrés. Again, my name is Pedro González. I'm postdoctoral research fellow at Simon Fraser University and Ocean Nexus. And I'm very glad to be here and presenting about how to project the future of blue economy. And I hope that you enjoy this presentation as much as I have been enjoying this research. The presentation is divided in, this is a little outline. It's a background of the blue economy to put everyone in context about the topic, projections of the blue economy, to how to do it. I'm going to talk about how to do it and the things that may influence the projections, and share our ongoing research to give a glimpse to our research and insights. Blue economy. We all have seen this term and we have heard this term. And blue economy has been used in different ways. Historically, it has been seen as an aspirational argument representing economic interest from multiple sectors. What sets apart from our approach is that we consider the local benefits as a central role of the blue economy. That said, here we can define the blue economy as establishment of the socially equitable, environmental sustainable, and economic viable sectors. These sectors include bioprospecting, fishing, ecotourism, offshore energy, and blue carbon, and many more. The key question here is, what is the best way to address the social, environmental, and economic interests of these sectors? In a previous work, we quantified the current capacity to establish the blue economy. Part of the key finding is that establishing a blue economy needs enabling conditions at least as much as ocean resources. And then when you can see here in the screen, we can divide in two parts. Let's see first the enabling condition part. The enabling condition part includes things like infrastructure, environmental regulation, but also those things to ensure the benefits are fairly distributed. What you can see in the map is that there's a lot of variation. So the enabling conditions are not the same for everyone. If we look into the resource availability, we can see the resources. Basically, this map is showing us where the resources are available. Things that we can highlight from here is resources in a different extent are available almost everywhere, but probably we have to focus on the coastal areas, which is where people live. So we can see that the resources are more available is close to the coastal areas. So that is important to consider. What happens if we combine these two dimensions, the resource availability and the enabling condition? Then we can have the blue economy capacity. And this is the map, again, show the blue economy capacity in higher or less extent. And while having this information is interesting, it tells us little about where to put the force in the future. Simple, because this is a snapshot. This is just the current condition, and this is basically static. And things are not static. Everything is changing. And as Andrés mentioned at the beginning, one of the main factors that are probably playing a big role is climate change. Climate change will play a big role in shaping the blue economy capacity in the future. So making projection of the future would be challenging. And one of the questions that raised here is how can we project this? How can we project the blue economy capacity? What is the things that we need and how are we going to do it? So what we need is the projections of these of the indicators, and these indicators represent the sectors. So probably you are familiar with some of these indicators, and one characteristic of them is that they have a lot of variability. Some of them have trends. Well, all of them have trends, sorry. Some of them are going up, others are going down, and then we have to deal with this variability. In a more technical approach, we can talk about other things that influence our models. And these are the model source, the scales, and the resolution. And let me explain this with an analogy. As Andrés mentioned, I am Mexican, and I like host gathering and eat tacos. When I'm going shopping to make my groceries, I have to start thinking about many factors. For example, how many people are going to be attending, the supermarket I want to attend, the brand, ingredients. Some people may be vegetarian, some may be like spicy or not. The point here is that my choices may influence the dinner. In modeling occur the same. We have different choices. What you can see in this map are the working group that make the projections. So there are tons of models, and the selection of the model is going to influence our outputs. It's not going to be the same if we select data from the Canadian Institute or if we select data from Thailand Institute. So the selection of our model will have different, even though they can be the same, representing the same ecosystem or the same variable, there is going to be slightly different. So let's make an example. And in this case, I'm picking two different sectors, fisheries and blue carbon. In this map, you see the current fisheries catch. what you can see in the map is if fisheries catch is less or more. You can see variability, and this is a modeled data. These modeled data come from reported data and basically how environmental shape the distribution of fish. And as you can assume, fish like some type of environment conditions. So to model, we look for environmental conditions that are suitable for that fish. So with that, we can see the variability of the current fish catch. Now let's see what happens if we also have the projections of this, to make more context, to put more in context of this example. According to the FAO, these fisheries catch account for $136 billion US. So just take into account. If we have projections of the current fish catch, so we can also have the change. So the map I'm showing here is the projected fisheries catch by 2050. What you can see here is the variability. So it's not going to be the same everywhere. Important thing is that if we average all this accounts for 3.28% of increase. So put everything together, and regardless of the variability, there is an increase actually. And what is that translated in the monetary aspects? That is account for $4 billion more. And that is going to be, or I'm there, or it's going to be challenging to say that way, because that is not an increase probably there is an increase in money. However, we can see the difference, that is going to be very different. We can see, give me a second. We can see that near the tropics are where we have a higher decrease, where in the global north or south, we have an increase. So the $4 billion, even if our gain, are not going to be the same for everyone. We can do the same for current blue carbon and follow the same example. We have mangroves, salt marsh area, and seagrass to represent this system. What you can see in the map is where it's less or more, you can find more or less this ecosystem. Following the same principle, if there is an estimation of $12 billion US from this ecosystem, if we have the projection, or when we check the projections, we can see the loss and gains from this ecosystem. We can see that in this case, we have a decrease of 16.5% overall. What is that translated in economic value? That is a $1.8 billion US. And then we can start thinking. Now we don't have the gain from like in the other example. In this case, we have a loss, and we also have the variability. Who is going to be affected, or who is going to have received the effects of these changes, and especially from these different in money. These two examples that I mentioned, it just included fisheries and blue carbon, but as I mentioned, there are many more sectors that we can include: mariculture, ocean energy, ecotourism, and bioprospecting. So the next thing would be, how can we combine all these sectors together to have a picture into the future? And this is something that we did. So now we compute the resource availability index, which is the map that you are seeing in your screen. So what you can see in the screen is very similar, or very familiar with the previous other slides. What you can see here is where the resources are going to be, in this case for 2050, an estimation of the resource availability. You can see here that resources in more or less extent are going to be available everywhere, closer to the coast where people live. But this tells us a little bit not the complete story, because we need to compare this to our current conditions. So if we compare the current conditions of the resource availability and the resource availability projected by 2050, like in this example, then we can see the change. We can see the change of resource availability by mid-century, and this is going to tell us a different story. Because what we can see in this map is the change of resource, and then we can see that is going to change everywhere, and then we can see that we have less resource availability in the tropics, almost everywhere, if I have to say it that way, But the important thing is closer to the coast is where we have like the stark differences if we see this in this red color. So questions here to remark is what about people? We have these projections, we have this information, and let me bring it back. We are going to have like the resource availability. The big question will be, what about people? If they are receiving if the differences are closer to the coast, what is going to happen? Now I'm pulling exactly the same map, and in this case, I'm also including the sector or entities that are less favorable. So, for example, in this case, what you see in this pink color are the small island development states and least developed countries. So let's think. What is this? What can we expect from this? We have changes everywhere, that's for sure, according to this image. Everyone is going to have to deal with this change in resource availability. That's true. However, we have to think who is going to deal and how they are going to deal with these changes and who is going to have the biggest impacts, especially if they don't have already the most favorable conditions. And this is translated, in other words, to reduce the opportunities, to reduce jobs, reduce incomes, and reduce livelihoods for these people. Overall, we have these maps, and then we have these projections, and these trigger different type of questions. For example, we know that resource availability is changing. Who benefits from this? Who is going to benefit from those changes, and who is not going to get benefit from those changes? Which sectors should be prioritized, and who decides how sectors are prioritized and developed? And I think this is an important thing, because probably this is related to the power dynamic in decision making. Who is going to decide what with these sectors should be prioritized to make this more or fairly for everyone? To boil down, or everything can be boiled down to this question: how can we enable the condition to withstand all these changes? We know, and I have seen in this image, that everything is going to change. There are going to be changes, there are going to be loss, they are not going to be the same everywhere. The question here is, how can we enable the condition to withstand all these changes? And this is everything from my end, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Pedro, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. I can hear
excellent. You. Andres, can you just open your camera? Hi, everyone. My name is Yoshitaka Ota. I'm a director of Ocean Nexus and also professor at University of Rhode Island. So thanks a lot for Pedro's presentation. This is done by Pedro, led by Andres. And I have to first introduce Andres' paper, which I'm co-author published 3 years ago. And that was published in the Nature. And in that paper, what we did was we basically assessed, okay, what are the resource availability, and what is the economic viability, and what is socio-political conditions which will create an equitable approach to blue economy. So this paper we published 3 years ago did not include climate change. We look at, okay, how realistic it is to just bring this wonderful blue economy opportunity, which, if we believe, should be for coastal and island nations, that we argue we need to create unable conditions, and which really puts the importance of social equity in blue economy. So that was really the paper. Now, we had a lot of feedback for our paper. People saying like, oh, what about in the future? You know, how's going to happen? What's going to be a change? So I basically asked Andres to just keep going. And Andres, with wonderful postdoc Pedro, continued to do the work, basically putting those resource availability, economic viability, and push it towards the future, basically plus climate change. So that was the result today, and it still hasn't finished all of it. So there's a lot more to say, I believe, but we just wanted to just show you guys some preview about it. What's important in this conversation is, including paper with Andrés, we argue, we not argue, it's like they argue. Blue economy is really sort of has a similar aspiration to the green economy, really for the people and for developing nations, and to just embark upon the new economy using what they have. And however, for blue economy, we're hoping that we consider the lesson learned from green economy. As you know, green economy, it's just not much talk about the human rights. Green economy, it was very much innovation focused. We can do this technology, we can do that technology, and then they just basically created this green economy, innovation, green growth, and people argue green growth is an oxymoron. It's just taking in energy, and so we can't really do that. So let's really not to do the same in blue economy, but to have the similar aspiration for the people in coast and island states, and really let them to just take this journey towards the future. So now I said enough, so I'm gonna ask a question to start the discussion. So first of all, Andrés, so you done that work for the blue economy 3 years ago, and now that you look at it, things will be changed in the future, and obviously some of the environmental projections actually says, okay, we're gonna have less fish in the place where people depending on the fish or fishing. So why don't we just, maybe start looking into alternative livelihood? Maybe we don't have enough fish, we should really change it. The course of our way of developing in our 3 years in our paper 3 years ago, we actually pointed, look, in a place like Southeast Asia, where small-scale fishery is very important, why regional policies going much more towards shipping, coastal development, it's just like it doesn't really meet the people's demand. We kind of criticized it. Right now, with the climate change, can we say the same thing, or should we actually change our argument and seek for, what else? What do you think, Andrés?
I don't know what happened to starting with softballs. It's like it's a really good question. And I think the first thing I'll say is to your point about the first paper, when people asked, oh, but what about the future in climate change? And don't worry, this is going to link up to my answer. I think people were really concerned with how are we going to meet the challenges of the future, right? Which sort of implies that we don't have challenges now, right? And so in that first paper, we said, well, wait a minute, yes, like we do want to know about climate change, and Pedro's fantastic work is now doing that. But we have a lot of challenges right now. Like right now, there's some serious challenges for people all over the place. And so a lot of the work in that initial research was to essentially see how we could combine and really kind of center these kind of social, political, et cetera, parameters together with the ocean resources, which is what a lot of people were kind of focusing on, right? That environmental part. And if I can summarize the whole research in one sentence, what we found is that the key gaps were not to do with natural resources, right? That's not to say that we don't need sustainability, but that's not where we saw the big gaps in terms of establishing these blue economy sectors, right? It was in that social and that governance and that political and policy standpoint. And so to answer your question then, as we see these resources change, and your question was, we see fish, for example, along the coastlines moving away from the tropics, generally speaking. Of course, there's variability, but generally speaking, away from the tropics. Should we just stop thinking about fisheries and focus on shipping or whatever else it might be? And the answer is, of course not. Right? There's still people that need these resources, and just because the fish are moving away doesn't mean that you can't sustain local communities the way that they have done for generations, right? Hundreds, some cases thousands of years. And so by not focusing on fisheries, right, or by assuming, well, let's just do some alternative livelihood, we're essentially condemning a lot of people that are simply not going to be able to convert to the alternative livelihoods, right? Not everybody is going to work on a ship, right? And so I think what we need to do instead of that is think, okay, how can we help these people that are relying on these fish for food, for culture, for livelihoods, et cetera, even with these fish moving away? And so part of that, depending where you are, so how we help the people is going to be different. I think in every case, we would want local leadership and support for local worldviews and perspectives. In many cases, what we're going to need is accountability for the people that are to blame for these different changes, right? And or different industries that have maybe exploited these coastlines. I think by and large, there's so much evidence that, like, yes, artisanal fisheries are huge and they're everywhere in the world, but it's really a lot of other fisheries that have come in, or coastal development has really harmed a lot of these places. So why should it be up to those people that are artisanal fishing to have to change their livelihoods? What about everyone else who's at fault for these things, right? And so, yeah, I guess to summarize, like, no, it doesn't mean that we forget about these sorts of industries. It means that we redouble our efforts to support the people that depend on them.
So now thanks a lot. I mean, that's really interesting. So it's probably not going to change because you're basically saying quite sort of like ethical point of view. Okay, we don't really want to forget about it. Those people cannot all move to the different sectors. But here's the pressure coming in. So the one side of it, okay, in order to make the ecosystem resilient against climate change, right? Just like resilient in the natural terms, natural science terms is quite well established. So just to make it, the much more resilient, or less harvest, protect and preserve. So it's like a really conservation burden coming up to the area where the climate change impact will be heavy. At the same time, Pedro, there will be people coming up and they say like, look, you're not going to have a huge chance on the fisheries. You really have to think about like other sectors. Here's the renewable energy. Here's the coastal development. Here's the sort of things, right, that you can really explore the new way of living with the ocean, or much more clearly, making money out of the ocean. So there's just conservation burden, right, or pressure, and also development pressure just comes together, right? And then they're saying, you don't really have one or the other. You got a choice, or maybe we can just make it living. But, it's very much similar in a way to the extent the colonial interest was sort of like expert both in preserving natural system and making money long time ago, which still continues. Pedro, my question is that looking at all the data, looking at all the things you put it in together, right? So how convincing it is to tell the people you should either do the conservation or the development, or is there any other like answers, for what you see gathering data together right now for the future?
Oh, thank you, Yoshi. That's an interesting question, and of course, and this is challenging. So putting all this data together, in terms of of how challenging it is, it's itself, I can tell you, it's really challenging. But then you have to make a good selections of what data are you using, because of course, like the outputs is going to pass to somebody else. So that is one of the key aspects of this. What are the selection of indicators that you are going to be using, because that is going to shape the final outputs. And that is going to, you have to be aware to not get biased to a specific sector, because then you have the risk that the decision making or whatever can use this data, and then that can create even more another problem, like create a social inequality, just because you are using data and unintentionally you are creating a data that is going to be used in a different way. And so you have to be very careful in that. So the selection of indicators is really important. You have to take care about what is the implication of those indicators. Why are you selecting this ecosystem? And go beyond and think like, what is the people, or how people can be affected with using this specific type of data? Why I'm using this, and should as a modeler, you are careful of the data, but also I think in my perspective, I'm also interested to see what is going to happen with this data. It's not just my job now, it's not just creating the data and the images and the projections. It's creating what is going to happen after this, what is going to happen with all this data I'm integrating. And for many people could be integrating many more variables, trying to integrate more information. But in the end, everything can be reduced to make a good selection or trying to represent what I'm trying to say with my data, and be careful that we can definitely we can not me myself, but in the end, this data can be used in a different way and create more inequality, especially social inequalities.
I mean, look, it's when we talk about the social inequity or inequality, I mean, when we're looking into global scale, we really have to look into the historic path we have taken, which is colonialism, the teaching people what to do, pushing a power structure to say this is our direction, and using terms such as sustainability really push their own interest and treating people as if they don't know what they are doing. That has been the history of it. And then we're hoping that blue economy will change that. In a way, green economy didn't change that. So that's what we are going for. But for now, if I were living in those regions, right, my question simply, and then I would just have to take care of a lot of people's livelihood. My question to you, Andres, well, let's say, so we are essentially small-scale fisheries. Okay, climate change is coming. And there are many people saying there's a lot of business opportunities. What do you think would be good? What do you think is a safe bet? Andres, what would you say? Shall we just go for the ecotourism? Shall we just go for the coastal development? Or shall we just do something else? Or you didn't put it in your data. But what about mining? We need the money, but we need the nature, but we also need our the livelihood. So what would you say? This would be a very simple question. You probably get it.
Those are not a simple question, but I think ultimately the thing that we have to always remember is exactly what you said, which is for a lot of these places, basically all of them, the root of what we call it unsustainable issues or whatever is colonialism. Right. If you look at, there's some recent work we've done in the Caribbean, and I'm sure we could do this for other places where the blue economy capacity now, right, these enabling conditions, et cetera, for Caribbean states can be directly traced back to colonialism and kind of post-colonial, neo-colonial histories, right? In these cases, really the simplest answer I can give is reparations. That's the answer. Right, if you want to truly help these countries, that's your answer right there. Right, there's a very clear accountability there, very clear exploitation, both human and of natural resources, if you want to kind of focus on those, and that is what you would need, right? And so again, our system is set up in a way that always shifts the burden of these changes onto those small scale fisher communities or coastal communities, right? If they're doing something else aside from fisheries, but it's not their accountability to bear, right? They didn't create these issues, right? And so in that context, if I was giving that simple question, I would say, well, whatever you choose to do, that should be your choice, right? After all these histories of exploitation, it should be your choice to say, okay, now I'm going to do this, right? And it really is no one else's business to once again come in and limit or do these sorts of things. People aren't, even though, you read in some places, oh, we came up with the concept of sustainability in 1980 something or whatever with the Brundtland report. Of course, people understand sustainability or the broader concept of that, right? People understand this. And so I think but a lot of times they're not allowed to make those choices. They're not able to make those choices because of these, I wouldn't even say histories of marginalization. I would say continuing marginalization, right? And so that I think is something that we need to address immediately, because otherwise we're setting up people to have a very twisted choice,
Mm.
Like, why should it be the burden on you to decide how you get out of these challenges that you're in that are not of your doing? And so long story short, local sovereignty, I think, is paramount for anything. People should have sovereignty and self-determination, I think, is really key, whatever we do forward. But we also have to recognize that we're putting people in a really bad spot when they're the ones that have to choose how they survive in this world that we've sort of created for them.
Thank you so much, Andres. Pedro, I have one last question. I usually do not like leaving with optimism without empty promises, but now your study is full of concrete data and analysis to it, which I'm delighted. So is there anything that you can say, optimistic? Yes, plus 3.9% fisheries sounds great. But is there any optimistic result within the preview that you have shown so far, or within the work you have shown so far, which we are not doing it for our own interest, but really something nice to leave with a concrete evidence to it.
Thank you, Yoshi, and thank you for mentioning that I mentioned something optimistic. That was not clearly the intention of being optimistic about the fisheries example. What I wanted to say is that, in just going back to that example, is to say, like, yeah, we're going to have gains, but the gains are not going to be the same for everyone, because we're going to have changes. So that was the point of making to bring this the money in the equation. So that was the point. So it's like, yeah, it's going to be a gain. It's going to be in terms of revenues. But the point is that it's not going to be the same for everyone, especially if not for those where the changes are, the decrease are more. So that was the point. And then with the second one, when we have losses, it's like, okay, I mean, this is probably more clear example. We know everyone that we're getting loss of the resources of ecosystem, and then who is going to be worse? Well, the ones that are already are in trouble. More positive, if I have to be in a more positive thing, is that those are projections. And those are projections. There are a lot of uncertainty. We rely on the best data that we can do. We rely on the best, again, going back on the selection of data and all this stuff. So rely on those working groups and those data, and we have the confidence that they have done it in a good way. So that is one thing. On the other hand, as I mentioned, those are projections, and as such, those are not forecasting. In my perspective, as making projections of climate change and all this stuff, give us a perspective of what of the condition that could be if we take one or other decision, if we take one or other way. But still, and being optimistic is that we can change it, because we can make different decisions to not go to that, to get that projection, to get that ending point or whatever, considering that there's a lot of variation and all this stuff, a lot of uncertainty. But that is my hope. And when I see these kind of things of changes and all this stuff, and things are going to be bad, and instead of getting blue about that, everything is going bad, I try to see it more like an opportunity to see what are the things that we have to do or start doing now to not get into that point. Because the data that I show you, and I can mention now, the data I'm showing today represent the lowest emission scenario. So I'm not showing the highest emission scenario. This is the lowest emission scenario, assuming many other things. So even with that scenario, we can see changes and all this stuff. So we still have opportunity, because there are a lot of uncertainty in climate change, especially in climate change. And I think that is opportunity, and the opportunity, well, it's now that we have the opportunity to see into the future with all this projection, to start changing it now and shape the future in a different way. That is what I will say.
Thank you very much, Pedro. And I must acknowledge there's many scholars. Our representation of the gender at this panel is not great. And many people It just happened to be this way, and I should apologize. I wasn't really fully conscious about it. Okay, now I'm gonna ask our communication lead, Area 1, to read questions from the people, and I'll leave the answers to both Pedro and Andres. Thank you very much for letting me to join this discussion.
Great. Thank you, Yoshi. Thank you, everyone. Transitioning to the open Q&A. Marina, sorry if I missed this, but do these models consider current actions taken in each region? For example, how could MPAs or other social-based development activities affect resource availability and impacts on communities?
Pedro, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I'm reading. It's-
Yeah, okay. I guess something that I could say quickly, Marina, while Pedro's reading this is that the models don't currently consider those actions, and I'll let Pedro kind of talk about what exactly is in them at the moment. But MPAs, these sorts of activities, are exactly what Pedro was referring to, and those would be our response actions to what's being currently forecasted, right? So in a next step, we could say, what if we had, whatever policy or strategy you might want to sort of think about, and see, could we mitigate some of these changes or use redistribution to basically not mitigate the change, but mitigate the impact on people after the fact, right? But for what's in the models right now, I'll let Pedro go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So definitely, that's exactly, Andres, and thank you for taking this. Yeah, exactly. So we can start playing with other factors that may be influencing the projections. And like Marina asking this question, for example, we can see what happens if we have marine protected areas and how these marine protected areas would be shaping the future and all this stuff. And then we can start having scenarios about that. And just to give you a little bit more context, for example, from the fisheries, the data that I'm showing from fisheries is just are the fisheries just without considering any other factors. One of the co-authors, Giuliano Palacios, he had made these projections considering marine protected areas. So for example, we can also make a scenario saying, okay, what if we put some weight into the marine protected areas in fisheries sector, and then we can run the model again, and then we can have a specific scenario considering marine protected areas for fisheries, for example, and so on. And the same for wetlands restoration. So we have data from wetlands restoration that are not included here, but we can create another model, we can create another scenario saying, like, you know what, we also have projection of what will happen if we have restoration of wetlands, and then the blue carbon will be different, and so on, making all the assumptions and have different scenarios. That is something that we can create, and that could be shaped regionally, of course. And in this case, I'm showing something globally, but of course, you can adjust it to probably a specific region, especially if you have data from other ecosystems or from other systems that you want to integrate into the model. Definitely you can shape it, and then you can play around in all this. So definitely, yes. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you so much. And it looks like we can close now, since one of the questions that a Q&A submitter submitted, we've already answered. And so I'm going to transition to closing.
No, can you, Ariel?
Should I still ask?
Would you share the question?
Sure. Yeah, I think everyone can see it, but let's go. Sherry, thank you for your question. There are many definitions of blue economy. World Bank includes healthy oceans. Is it really a blue economy with the global economy, which much is contributing to environmental, climatic, and inequity issues? How can the poor access an economy from which they were excluded or marginalized to begin with? And even with access, will they be competing with the global economic system? What I'm trying to articulate is a blue concept of the economy possible without transforming the existing system?
So, sure, the short answer is no. We need some transformation for sure. So the current economic systems, as we mentioned, have not just marginalized people, right? A lot of people would argue that the system relies on marginalizing people. There's a lot of these sorts of studies when it comes to sort of racial capitalism and other concepts where we couldn't have the system we have today without having marginalized a lot of people and excluded them. And so that's why there does need to be a transformation. And I think Pedro alluded to this very briefly at the beginning, and so did Yoshi actually, but that is exactly what the blue economy as a term was proposed to address by the large ocean states or the small island developing states, right? This idea that, listen, we don't need an economy that moves markets or makes someone into a trillionaire. That's the reason we're in this mess, right? We need something that actually works for local priorities, that works for local goals. And that was what the blue economy is intended to do, right? And so at its very core, the blue economy is transformational. And that's why Pedro was mentioning, like, that's what sets it apart from others, that's centering on social equity. Now, a lot of people are using this term uncritically and basically using it to greenwash whatever it is that we're already doing. That's wrong. We have to kind of speak out on it. And so the short answer to your question is yes, absolutely. The blue economy needs to be transformational because the current economic system, as much as we want to try and help people participate in it, if we can, is just fundamentally inequitable. And that's something that we're going to have to address. And we do see it being addressed in some local examples. Thanks so much for your question.
Great, thank you so much. Now we'll change to transitioning to closing. Thank you so much for joining us at our Ocean Nexus webinar. This is really part of the Ocean Equity Learning Forum where we can learn about our 9 research themes. And if you want to learn more about the blue economy, you can scan this QR code or go on this website to see all of our resources related to the blue economy. Next up, next month, we have marine plastic pollution and social equity updates. All the information will be found on oceannexus.org/webinar, exactly the same place where you found this webinar. If you want to learn more, you can find out about Ocean Equity Learning Forum, Ocean Pollution and Wellbeing by scanning this QR code. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been amazing. And the recording will be on the same webpage, oceannexus.org/webinar. And I'll send a follow-up email tomorrow to let you know where all the links are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
everyone.
everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Appreciate it. Bye.